There is one of 4 reasons why an e-com store is pretty much failing or having a hard time to scale or having a hard time to scale profitably. When these stores, especially this one here, fixed these 4 things, or at least one of these 4 things, they were able to literally grow from $5,000 a month up to $65,000 a month. And it was very, very simple and straightforward. I'll actually run you through right now what these 4 pillars are. The fact of the matter is though, that essentially it is not revolutionary. Like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And this guy who owns this store is a one-man band. He's under the age of 22, and he was literally able to scale. Obviously, the dips and troughs have reasonably meant that he was, essentially the dips and troughs have been a point where you've scaled up, sort of systemized the offer or systemized the ability or the ads and optimized a little further, reinvested some more ad spend and got into more of a rhythm. But he's been able to fix one of these 4 things or all of these 4 things, and that's demand gen, intent capture, retargeting, and CRO. And quite honestly, these are some of the most important things, and any e-com store that is failing is going to fall into one of these buckets. Now, pretty much demand gen is something that really I had to learn from an early start. And when I started running my first e-com store, which was selling sunset lamps, no one wakes up needing a sunset lamp. And essentially what happened was, you don't need a sunset lamp. It's not a commoditized item. So you had to use the demand gen to create the demand, create the want for this product, and you have to create the want out of nowhere, right? And mostly that was done through meta ads, TikTok ads, and maybe even organic content, such as UGC campaigns or user-generated content. Now, that is really important, but it doesn't get an awesome ROAS because people are usually on the loo. Like, they could be searching for their product, could be searching for this, they're usually on the loo. Like, they could be searching for this item, usually on the loo. They could be wanting this item all of a sudden, but they're in such an inconvenient place that they're gonna look it up later, right? They now have the intent, right? But they're not going to purchase straight from it, so it doesn't have such a good ROAS, which eventually leads them into this next stage where we need to capture their intent mid-search. Evidently, this has a better ROAS. And I also used to sell massage guns, right? And Theragun, the biggest massage gun company, had a very, very large advertising spend to be able to get all of that demand for massage guns, make it into a thing, and Theragun's now pumping out their orders. But obviously now there's obviously intent to buy, but also now there's big intent to sell it because it's such a trend, which means you need to stick out in search with, I highly recommend starting on PMax, right? And placement exclusions play a huge part in that. So essentially excluding where you don't want to be placed. And usually a high ROAS comes from this because they have the intent, they're intending to buy. So if you're paying a smaller amount of money to show up higher in the list, it might result in a large cost per click, but you're getting a really high ROAS because you're not showing to people that are going to visit a different website like you do in demand gen. So I highly recommend that these 2 pillars are like the biggest things that people have trouble with when they first start up a store, because if they create a clothing brand, they have no demand around their clothing brand because it's not a commoditized item. So they need to create the demand and create the intent. But if you're selling something like a commoditized item, you can definitely easily capture intent with some really good PMax ads. Then that brings you on to retargeting, because essentially we need to focus on the rule of 7. So that's essentially where someone has to see your product up to 7 times or over 7 times to get the intent to buy, right? They might want to buy the thing, but they don't trust your business. They don't have the obligation yet to buy from you because they don't trust you. They need to see your products over 7 times, which is why we need to retarget. And that essentially results in the higher frequency. So on Meta, it's measured by frequency. And if you have a frequency over 1, then that means you're showing back to more people, which I highly recommend get a retargeting audience for Meta. But also SMS is highly underrated because it shows on their phone. It might be a bit more expensive, but I highly recommend you get some SMS happening in your account. And that's exactly what we do with clients. And all of this is exactly what we do with clients as well. People also don't see the first time they buy. And I highly recommend running Klaviyo flows because Klaviyo is just a go-to email marketing system. Lastly, the CRO, which stands for conversion rate optimization. And that's essentially where most people drop the ball because they spent all of this effort, right, making this system super optimized up to here, but then when they get to CRO, they just drop it. And I think that needs to load faster on mobile. Over 80% of people convert on mobile. And what we found with clients is that they want all this pretty website, but the more prettiness that you put on a website, it tends to make it load slower, right? The more JavaScript elements that you have on a website, it makes it load slower and it's more clunky. When you run on mobile, again, it slows it down further than desktop because there's less computing power and less bandwidth to try and load through a mobile network. It becomes a really big trade-off between what do we want on the website versus are we actually able to get people to convert? And 80% of people convert on mobile. So it doesn't really make sense on having all these fancy elements. Anyway, it needs to be brain dead simple as well. And it needs to be above the fold. So essentially, when people first load up your website, they need to be able to convert straight on that without having to scroll to try and find the add to cart button or anything like that. And 3 seconds, because everyone has TikTok brain right now, that in 3 seconds, you need to be able to convince the person to buy, they need to be able to buy, and they also need to just trust your website. It is all based on trust because there is so much scams online right now. Also a payment gateway, so you need to make sure you know your ICP or intended customer profile or client profile. The ICP needs to be really important because then you need to go, hey, well, what does my customer or client actually, how do they buy, right? What's their demographic look like? Do they need Afterpay? Do they need Zip Pay? Are they based overseas? So they want Klarna? Like, what do they want? Where do they want it? Do they want PayPal? Anything like that. So make sure you know your ICP, make sure you know your demographic, and then you can have a really good effort into the CRO. And as I said, that is exactly what we do with clients. We list it out and we go, hey, well, what do we need to activate here? Where are people falling off in this flow? And then where can we actually optimize their conversion rate, right, of course, but also optimize their demand gen, intent capture, and retargeting, because it all goes hand in hand. And if one of these pillars is falling off, pretend the demand gen, then we're essentially just relying purely on people with the intent to buy, and we can't create more customers, right? We're limited in how many people that are trying to buy from us, right? That is exactly what we do. And if you're interested about jumping into this and having a bit of a more look, just like we do here, book a growth game plan call. We'll have a look, we'll jump in and we'll just go through your stuff, your website, and just little nut out it a little bit. And just like this, I'll share my screen and we can go through it. Pretty much it. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. See ya.